Well, we're fresh off finishing the Augusta Business Daily Culture Expo. I'm with Darin Meyers. Darin, you were third up on the dais, if you will, keynote speaker. What'd you think of the expo?
Oh, I thought it was great. Sort of reinforced what I've learned is how important culture is, and I think throughout the day, the various speakers really did a good job of enforcing the concepts of how important culture is, and I certainly tried to put some icing on the cake there at the end as the cleanup batter, if you will.
Absolutely. In the third hole.
Well, I'm sorry. We only had 3 keynotes. So, but I guess that was the cleanup.
That's okay. You did great, and I think a thread throughout the day was we still are facing a labor shortage, and you touched on that.
Yeah, I tried to look how important, in fact, teamwork, and I think in our title here, is so important. But, you know, I emphasized in my speech that, you know, we're all combating and fighting for a finite number of labor. They're in a pool that's shrinking, and we know what's been going on here as of late, pandemic-wise. And I just wanted to try to emphasize, as business owners, you got the levers of benefits and wages and all that, and that's all fine and dandy. But at the end of the day, the teamwork of the organization is very, very important as well.
And what's a bit tricky is we're living in an era, I suppose, where there's a bit of a generational shift. One of the things you brought out is there's basically 5 different class of people now.
Yeah, driving good culture in a company is hard enough, and with the fact that you got a labor shortage, and by the way, that labor shortage is going to continue to be a problem, and in fact, there's data out there that says it's going to continue to get tighter over the next decade. Europe has certainly had a fertility rate issue, and they're dealing with issues, but it isn't just to the European continent. I think our country's got a labor shortage projection that it's going to shrink as well in the next decade. And so combine that with what you mentioned of we currently have 5 generations. Now, I have a 75, 76-year-old employee in my business, and I know others do as well. And so even the pre-baby boomers, the baby boomers, the Gen X's, the millennials, the Gen Zers, and all that stuff, there's arguably 5 generations currently sitting in people's office spaces and their teams.
Yeah, and the person you mentioned is part of what's called the traditionalists, if you will, the sage, seasoned veterans.
Right.
And what we once thought of would be maybe millennials. You can now there's Generation Z, you know, even younger,
right,
than the millennials. So, boy, I guess how can this create a cultural divide with the crossover of those 5?
Yeah, well, I think what I was trying to emphasize is developing a culture that is a healthy culture is tough enough without any other kind of dynamics coming into play. However, if you insert the ingredients of post-pandemic, where we have, in some cases, working remotely or flexible work schedules, you tie that in with, hey, I have 5 differing demographics that are potentially operating within my team, and they all typically dance or sing to a different sheet of music. It can be very difficult. We know what makes a baby boomer tick is frankly dramatically different than someone that was born after the year 2000.
Right.
And
I'm a boomer.
Are you?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I am. I think I was born in 1966, so I think I'm a millennial, or not a millennial. I think I'm a Gen Xer.
Gen Xer.
Right. But the point there is, in each one of those generations, I think we all have differing driving factors. And so back to the office and the workforce, it's difficult to talk about getting a good culture when everybody in your group may see things differently and may be motivated by different items.
And we should say that Darin studies this and works with business owners and key leaders really every day as a coach with Tab CSRA, and his website is tabcsra.com. And this is a peer-to-peer type advisory group. And how important are some of these aspects to the folks that you work with on a daily basis? Is this something that comes up a lot?
A lot is maybe a
understatement.
I think, at least within my boards, it seems like we talk a lot about labor, whether it's trying to hire, trying to recruit, trying to retain. There's a lot of frustration out there. And as I talk to other Tab business owners across the country, we're no different. And it seems like, I would tell you, 75% of the time I chat with people, it's about something associated with labor to some degree.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's isolated to the CSRA here in Augusta or Aiken, but I think it's nationwide. So I think that's, but the point I want to try to make a little bit at the Business Expo is clearly a wage is important for all generations. Clearly good benefits are good as well. But for the newer generations, that wage and benefits is certainly important, but that teamwork and the culture and feeling employed and engaged and involved is very important as well. So as you're tackling reducing labor, opportunities, and you're competing with other business owners for a finite number of people, it's, I think, very, very important to make sure that your teamwork isn't running off good labor. So that's why you asked what I wanted to entitle this podcast. I thought, hey, just need to recognize team pitfalls or team shortages or team downfalls, in my mind, equals labor shortages. It will only come with time. And so you're having to push a rope if your teamwork isn't working right when it comes to trying to attract and retain good employees.
That seems like the overriding problem, if you will, in the CSRA. And of course, there are solutions, and we're going to touch on those solutions with Darin. Again, he runs a peer-to-peer advisory board and does coaching of business leaders, and that is tabcsra.com. But since we are in the season of Thanksgiving, we should give gratitude to the hosts, Augusta Podcasts. You've been here several times. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to applaud the facility and the staff. They've, as someone that's limited on getting and doing podcasts or videoing or broadcasting kind of stuff, I would call myself a rookie or a novice. And this group has really set me at ease coming in here and making me look better than maybe I deserve. So I really think they do a great job.
And we try to post a number of their podcasts that they do for other clients on our website at augustabusinessdaily.com. And you can go to augustapodcasts.com. That's plural. They have about 20 clients now, and you can kind of look through and see some options for your business. Again, that's augustapodcasts.com. Okay, we're back with Darin Meyers, and Darin is the local franchisee of Tab CSRA. And in a past podcast segment, we had talked about, teamwork shortage can create labor shortage. If you don't have good teamwork, you may not have enough people to help you. But I know there are some solutions that you preach and teach.
Well, yeah, and I think they're very, very important. I certainly think you need to make sure you have the right vision. Take the time to have the vision right. In some cases, if you're changing your vision, you may want to get your employees involved so they feel some ownership on that vision. But regardless of how the vision was created, it's important that the employees understand the direction and the vision and the values of the company. I think that's very important. Secondly, then I think the business owner certainly needs to maximize the team capabilities and competence. And I think that starts a little bit with the hiring process. I think you need to make sure you're hiring employees that will fit the vision. Not only benefits the business, but it also benefits the employee. So in other words, you're trying to establish the right fit right out of the gate. One of the things I try to remind people is there's no guarantees that you get that right fit, but you spend the appropriate amount of time to maximize your chances for the future employee and the business that you do have the right fit. I think sometimes we get desperate and we maybe hastily make a decision on an employee hire. And I always say no hire is better than a bad hire. I think that's because at the end of the day, if you've had a bad hire, it's error carried forward. And you're going to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to fix something that maybe could have been prevented up front. So I think Nick Saban, I know I'm in Georgia territory here, but Nick Saban beats most of the nation year over years because his recruiting and his hiring on his football team. And I think the correlation to business is very strong, that you got to make sure that you're getting the right players. So to me, once you got your vision, you try to hire and get the team competence set up where it can support that vision. So once you've got the right team hired, I think it's important that you appropriately train and develop and maximize that team's capabilities.
So Darin, you mentioned vision. As an employer, how do you connect your employee to the vision?
Well, one, I think you got to communicate it, and not just communicate it, explain, elaborate, get into the details, ask questions, get answers, make sure there's alignment. I think, vision statements can be well written, but if people below in the organization don't understand it, I think largely it's all for naught.
Yeah.
I think you need to make sure you get a good vision and value statement, but I think more importantly then is you need to make sure the organization is aligned to that.
Right.
And so you got to, I think, communicate often, explain, get excited about it, make it important. The leader has the responsibility of you get what you inspect and make important. And I think that you really need to, the team needs to understand how important that vision is and the approach. And it certainly starts, as we mentioned earlier, about hiring to people. I think you need to make sure that you try to hire as well as establish your organization chart to the strengths and weaknesses of the candidates and the employees, and making sure that you have the right fit.
So what to do then for an employer? I mean, you've heard of all these bonuses. We've done some stories about just mills in the area offering $3,500 either sign-on or retention bonuses.
Right.
Is it money that's going to help cut it?
Well, I can't sit here and say money. Money would help me a little bit,
Sure.
and I think money would always be a consideration. Wage benefits are going to be a play in everything, I think, to some extent. What I'm trying to emphasize in this podcast is, aside from those, it's your teamwork and your culture. Don't underestimate how important that is. Mm-hmm. You can pay a great employee phenomenal benefits and a phenomenal wage, and if they're dissatisfied because of the culture, the teamwork, or the engagement, and having a retention problem, bring in the next employee and pay them a little bit more than the other employee, you're going to go through that cycle. So I think it's extremely valuable to establish just a strong team, because everybody wants to be a part of a good team.
Yeah. And lastly, talk about the bond through this pandemic of people who've been allowed and trusted to work virtually and the viewpoint of the employer and how they work together?
Yeah, I may have a few people that differ with me on this and disagree, but I think here's what I worry about with this post-pandemic and flexible work schedules and working from home and remotely. First of all, I'm all for it. I'm not against that. But the point is, I don't think it's one size fits all, and I don't think it will always work for every organization. But here's what I do worry about. For those businesses that have transitioned pre-pandemic, where they had an office where everyone was there together, let's assume for years, had established relationships, had established bonds, and then were asked to work remotely, I think those bonds and relationships previous established will allow that remote work environment to be successful. But I don't necessarily think you should take that for granted and assume that always leaves, because what I worry about is over the years, the transition has worked, and I'm going to say partly because previous relationships and teamwork and culture had already been established. The business owner or the leaders take their eye off the ball because the transition of working remotely is successful. Then I believe you're going to have attrition, retirements, and slowly over time, those bonds and relationships will be broken just due to people moving on, things changing. And what I worry about is business owners forget to monitor and recognize, is the teamwork, the culture staying the same as we migrate, or is it slowly degrading as people move on? And I'm afraid people could take their eye off the ball. And I'm not saying that means you got to come and bring them back to work. I think each business is going to have to make what's right for them. But I am making the point that just because the initial transition remotely worked great, I think it's going to be incumbent upon the business owner to really stay engaged over time to make sure that teamwork and that culture stays strong and healthy. Because I think if unmonitored and as people change out, I definitely think it could degrade.
He's Darin Meyers, again, runs a peer-to-peer advisory board, Tab the Alternative Board, and tabcsra.com. Happy holidays.
Well, to you as well. I think
you.
the last time we talked at the podcast, we were going to go play tennis and have a little tennis match.
It's getting a little frosty for that, though.
I think you're hiding from me. I don't think you're wanting to play.
I'll bet you some giblet gravy. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.